And joining us now here on the Jay Stevens podcast, it is a gentleman that I have been teasing on Locked on Buckeyes for a while. I think I teased him on the Jay Stevens podcast last week, and things got pushed back as far as when we can record. But we are together. If you want to get an Ohio State centered conversation, check out Locked on Buckeyes today. We went in depth about almost every Buckeye prospect that can be drafted right now. But this, not Ohio State. This is about what you guys have been waiting for, Ryan Roberts, to go in depth about this year's draft class. My guy, Ryan Roberts, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Having a 3-month-old at the time of draft is not the most ideal for being on schedule, but I appreciate the flexibility as always, Jay. This is always fun.
Absolutely, man. I didn't ask you this previously. What's it like having a newborn?
It's good, man. It's good. It's a lot of trial by error, learning things a lot, and very frequently, but I mean, it's the best thing ever. It's exceeded expectations to say the least, and it's a joy. I had to go back to working in person. I was working virtually for a little bit, so it's been a little bit of a tough transition. But I wouldn't change anything in the world right now.
That's good to hear, man. I see your pictures on Twitter all the time, and your family looks so happy. The smile on your face now, it's the same one you have in all the pictures. Like, it's not fabricated, it's not fake. I believe it's all real, and I'm just happy to be on this side of it. I have no kids myself, so I get to see how everybody that I talk to via podcasting and then personal friends that I see on a regular basis, how they're responding and how their life is impacted for a positive reason when a kid comes into their lives. And I'm sure those early days are tough. I hear the twos are tough too, man. So watch out for what you're going to get in about a year and a half from now.
Yeah, no, it's not something I'm not looking forward to right now. She's, we're getting her used to sleeping in the crib and doing all that good stuff. So she's sleeping though. I mean, she's waking up only like once every night right now, which is fantastic. It's just, it's a little tough with me going back to work. So I try to be really nice because my wife's with her all day. So I'm like, I'll be the one that wakes up at night, So it's a little tough. It's a little draining. It's a little tiring, but like I said, it's a lot of fun, and it's the good things that you remember, obviously. So
absolutely. Speaking of good things and things we'll remember, people remember the football season for how odd it was and how things were a little bit different. At the same time, I think people remember about how abnormal the time period between the end of the season and right now has been for one player getting knocked. Aside from that, we'll get to that in a second, Ryan. When you yourself look at this draft class and from the end of the season till now, if you dove in, as you've gotten into the tape and gone in headfirst into all of your film study, what do you see about this year's 2021 NFL draft class?
I think it's a good class. I really do. I've enjoyed. There's positions that are extremely strong, like wide receiver and linebacker and corner and offensive line. A lot of good football players, quarterback at the top. There really is. The trouble that this season has put on this class, though, is giving players an extra year of eligibility, allowed players to go back to school and then to lessen the depth that we would have in this class. So I don't think it's the greatest depth class of all time. I think there's some, when you get into 6th and 7th rounds, like there's going to be some dart throwing at that point. There's going to be some guys that did not have draftable grades that are getting drafted just because, like, hey, maybe they had a trait. I don't think that depth is great. I think next year's class is better depth-wise, but I think that it's a really good class that a lot of players had limited opportunity to take advantage of the draft season. But I still think that this is a good year to be able to reload in a lot of different positions, and I just think overall it's a good class.
With this class being a class that had more opt-outs than normal, opt-outs, and I mean before the season, your Micah Parsons, I think Gregory Rousseau, Caleb Farley from Virginia Tech, you had guys that were already going to be top 10 picks opting out. And I was impressed by how they looked in their pro day. I don't know how that hindered you or how you view the opt-out period where before you saw guys maybe opt out during the bowl season. I don't want to play in the Sun Bowl or the Outback Bowl, which is a bigger bowl than the Sun Bowl. I don't want to play in that bowl either. I'm just going to get my body ready, get a couple weeks away from my team to prepare for the combine. How do you view that, and how did that impact your evaluation period?
Well, it's so when you're in the summer, you're evaluating a player, you're watching the film, but then you're also projecting a lot because they have they have a year that they have to play still, right? For those opt-out players, the projection is still very much in effect, even more than it might usually be, because Last time we saw Micah Parsons, he was a 19-year-old linebacker. Last time we saw Penei Sewell, he was an 18 and 19-year-old offensive tackle. We haven't seen him in a year. So they weren't able to take that next step as a prospect that we necessarily wanted to see. And then from the NFL side of things, from what all indications are, there are some teams that are just going to be very hesitant on opt-outs in general. Some teams I think are not even going to have them on their board because it's like buying a car, right? Like you go to the lot and you want to test drive it before you sign the papers, right? Like you want to be able to see what you're getting. And I do applaud the guys like the Micah Parsons that you mentioned and Jamar Chases and Penei Sewells that went to their pro days and were fantastic. Obviously, since their opt-out, they have been grinding at it. They have been preparing for it, and they have been ready. But then there's other guys like Jalen Twyman, for instance, from Pittsburgh, and a couple opt-outs during the season like Paris Ford from Pittsburgh as well, where they went to their pro days and they didn't seem prepared. It's like, what have you been doing? Who have you been listening to? So I think that there's been a little bit of a back and forth. I think there's going to be multi-perspectives of opt-out situations. For me, the only thing that changed was, my summer eval for those guys became my final eval. There's no film left to watch. Like, he is what he is. Jamar Chase in the summer of 2020 was the same player that he is now for the 2021 NFL draft. So that's the only way it changed for me. I do think, though, the opinions from the decision makers from the NFL, some people will hold that against them, unfortunately.
It is unfortunate. It is a period that the fan in me, even the analyst in me, the talking head, if you want to go that route, I want to see them play. Maybe a little selfishly, Ryan, but I want to see them play. And I do think it is a benefit to them to play as many games as they can. Speaking of playing as many games as they can, you get a guy, we have different guys that play different levels of games. You got Trevor Lawrence, took over his freshman year at quarterback, never looked back. You got Trey Lance, played one season in a game, and some people didn't really count the showcase game he had because it was not a good game, not the best game. But you're not playing and you play one game and you're playing somebody that's been playing. I get it. It's not the best. Justin Fields transfers, started 22 games. We saw what he did. You got Zach Wilson. A lot of people are surprised. The projection is number 2 overall to the Jets. No one really makes that makes sense. Then you got a guy, Mac Jones, recruited the same year as Tua Tagovailoa, waited his turn, and then played, I thought, very well last year.
Sure.
And I don't know how you see it, but this quarterback situation, the quarterback conversation, I just listed off a few guys. Many people know about 4 of them. You may know a little bit about Zach Wilson, not a lot. And then Trey Lance, you may not have heard about, except for this podcast or a few other places, because his name is just a name, not a face with a name. With this quarterback class, what's your 1 through 5, and why is he ordered that way?
Number 1 is Trevor Lawrence. Like you said, it's been anointed now. I mean, he's been the golden child, since he was in high school. I think he's lost like 2 football games in the last 6 years or some crazy number. So when you look at the size, athleticism, arm strength, experience, production, it hits every box. And then he's also, he just got married at 21 years old. He's a leader on and off the field. During the Black Lives Matter movement, like he is helping to organize rallies and being outspoken, and that, like, he feels like a leader. He seems to have everything together. There's not much holes besides him being a little thin that, like, you can honestly like poke and be like,
I heard he's like 213. 213
at the pro day, which is really odd. He was getting ready to have a shoulder surgery though, so I'm questioning like how limited his weight program was at that point. Maybe he lost a little bit of mass, which, he's always been a little bit of thin. I mean, so it's a little bit of troubling. It is. And that's a part of the weakness column. But for me, it's like, that doesn't have anything to do with him even playing football. Like that is just a physical thing that he can improve because he has a body. We always talk about body typing. He has a body that he could put on a substantial amount of weight. He could be 225, 230 pretty easily. So I have him number 1. I actually have Trey Lance number 2. I know that there's going to be a debate between Trey Lance and Justin Fields because physically, stylistically, they're kind of similar players. For me, being a guy that's a independent scout, that I can gamble on upside more than an NFL team can sometimes because I'm not going to lose my job if I'm wrong, right? Yeah. I mean, to be honest with it. So I look at Trey Lance, and in the right situation, I just think he could be a little better than Justin Fields. The floor might not be as high, but I think the upside is very substantial. And I think that Justin Fields is my number 3. And I think that he is very similarly talented. I think there's something a little mechanical about him at times that worries me a little bit, just a little bit. But I think that in the right scheme, he could be very successful. Then I have Zach Wilson, number 4, who, of course, everyone's talking is going number 2. I get it. I was very hesitant on it early, and then I sat down and I watched him, and I understand it. I get it. I understand why people are infatuated with him. I personally would not take him number 2. I would not, obviously. But I don't blame anybody for drafting him in the top 10 to 15. Like, I get it. He has very talented arm, super quick release. The talent's there. He's an athletic kid. Like, it's fine. There are some things about his personality that a little off for me. I don't know how to like quantify it as much. It's just I'm a big guy. Like, I love to just listen to interviews, listen to coaches talk about players, listen to them talk about football. And there's just something there that bothers me a little bit. So that's just why I'm a little tiny bit hesitant on him. And then this is my big hot take, I guess, right? Because most people have just Mac Jones thrown in at 5 because that's the assumed he's going to go in the top 10, first round. I do not have Mac Jones as my 5th ranked quarterback in this class. I have Davis Mills from Stanford as my 5th ranked quarterback in the class. Because again, I have the opportunity to bank on upside. For me, I put those guys together next to each other. And from a physical perspective, Davis Mills is just much more talented than him. So I'm looking at him and I'm saying, if Davis Mills is on Alabama, are they any worse? Aren't they better? They're probably better. So for me, getting Davis Mills in the 2nd round is much more attractive than drafting Mac Jones in the 1st round. It's something that I would not personally do. I like Davis Mills. He has a limited sample size. Some people are going to be very hesitant on him, and I also get that side of everything. But if we're talking about upside, we're talking about development, we're talking about what these guys can be looking forward, I would personally take Davis Mills over Mac Jones.
Interesting. I was not expecting that from you. There is a guy that people are curious to see possibly where you may think he will go, with Lawrence at 1, Wilson at 2. I think it's going to be number 3 with Trey Lance, not Mac Jones. I think I think Lance is a better quarterback, honestly, than Mac Jones as well. Even without like having all 10 quarterbacks, that's my naked eye, my limited knowledge of scouting from what you do. I just think that Trey Lance is a better quarterback. But at 4, you got maybe the Falcons take Kyle Pitts. Let me see who's at 5. At 5, I've heard Jamar Chase. I think it should take Penei Sewell for the Bengals. That's just my pick. Dolphins don't need a quarterback. Lions, okay, you got Jared Goff, but what do you do there? 8, Panthers just got rid of Teddy Bridgewater. So there's a lot of different movement there. You and I have talked about what I think as far as who I think will move up into the top 10 to get Justin Fields. Do you see the same thing? You know what I'm thinking, so I'm not going to go ahead and say it again. Patriots, yeah. I'll say Patriots moving up to top 10 to get him. I think it was a move anyway with the weird offseason for Belichick. I think you're going to see some weird moves for Belichick in the draft as well, starting very, very early. Where do you see Fields going, and why is it a good fit for him?
I think he's going to go in the top 10. I think that you nailed it on the head. And if you haven't checked out our episode on Locked On Buckeyes, I would say that you need to go check that out because we had a really in-depth conversation about it. And I think that stylistically, he's very similar to Cam Newton. Speaking about Justin Fields, I think that it would be a very advantageous situation to be behind Cam for a year, or at least a few games, to sit, to learn, to see how he is as a professional, what he does on a day-to-day basis, how to be a professional for himself. And I think that would be a great option. I don't think a lot of people are talking about like, hey, do you have to trade up from 15 to 4? I don't think you have to. I think that Fields is going to slide a little bit. I think that the Detroit Lions at 7, Carolina Panthers at 8, Denver Broncos at 9. I think those are all teams that could be potential trade partners. I think that's where New England needs to go up. Denver is the only team that worries me, like maybe they would be in the Justin Fields market, but I do think that New England makes the most sense. And then after that, you're talking about teams like the Washington football team at 19. You're talking about Chicago Bears at 20. Will they be in the market? Maybe. It's just from 19 and 20 up into the top 10 is a big leap. That's going to take a lot of draft capital. So I myself think that the New England Patriots are the best fit for a player like Justin Fields.
From quarterback, Ryan, to wide receiver, I'm not really trying to go crazy in depth with all of this stuff here. Kind of just going position by position, top prospects, little day 2 talk, little day 3 talk as well. when you look at wide receiver, you talk about an opt-out in Jamar Chase, but you also have athletes like Jalen Waddle, who got hurt. I thought he would have won the Heisman if he didn't get hurt. Devonta Smith did blow up, but I still think Waddle is the better wide receiver between those two. Then you also have Rashad Bateman from Minnesota. Rondell Moore, a guy, if he doesn't get hurt, he's probably a top 10 surefire, not maybe top 10, top 15 pick, a surefire first rounder there. You got Terrace Marshall Jr., Elijah Moore, Kadarius Toney, just a lot of the names people know about. This wide receiver class, coupled with last year's, I've heard people say this is as good or better than last year's class, which is saying a lot. You saw some good early production from those young cats once they came into the NFL. This year's receiver class, what do you see?
I think it's better up top. I think it's close because, like, I was a big Jerry Jeudy guy, and CeeDee Lamb was a fantastic football player. Justin Jefferson was put together the best rookie season we've ever seen of a wide receiver, at least in receiving yards, 1,400 yards. So fantastic group in 2020. I think that Jamar Chase is better than any receiver in last year's class. I think Jalen Waddle is at least, I mean, the first wide receiver off the board last year was Henry Ruggs. Jalen Waddle is a better football player than Henry Ruggs. Like you said it, he was the best player on that Alabama offense. He was the number one receiver on that Alabama offense, the leading receiver on that Alabama offense when he got injured. So no disrespect to Devonta Smith, because he's the top 5 wide receiver in this class as well. I think he's going to be the third guy off the board, and I think he's fantastic as well. He has more concerns, but Rashad Bateman is another guy that I like a ton. There's guys like Terrace Marshall. There's guys like Rondale Moore, who I agree with is a top 20 pick if there were no concerns of the injuries with him. I think that he's a very good player. You got guys like Elijah Moore that have asserted themselves in this wide receiver room. Nico Collins moving further down the board a little bit. Like, there's a lot of guys. The depth for me is better than last year, and I like the top better. So for me, it's a better overall receiver class. I think that you can get an alpha potential player in the first round with size and speed, athleticism, and then moving into the second, third rounds, and that you're going to see more of the archetype of smaller guys that maybe have a little more speed, maybe not the traditional boundary X receivers with a little more size, but I think that you can get playmakers all over the board, and this is another historically deep wide receiver group.
Ryan, there are a couple of running backs, well, more than a couple, but two guys that got talked a lot last year. You and I think I had you on or talked with this a little bit as far as Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, who's one, who's two, where will they go, why is one ahead of the other. I like Najee Harris more than Travis Etienne, just as far as if I'm just ranking them 1, 2. I would love to have either one of them in college or in the pros. I think they both bring something different, unique to them, that whoever drafts them will love what they get. But then you also have other guys in this running back class, a couple guys from North Carolina that pop off the page as well, off the screen. The running back class hasn't got a lot of talk lately, but Ryan, I see a lot of talent in this group.
I think the top 3 especially, and you mentioned a couple of them, Travis Etienne with the home run speed and the production that he has, Najee Harris more with the larger all-around skill set, has surprisingly good hands. I saw comps to Matt Forte, who I think that's a fantastic comp, to be honest. And then Javonte Williams from North Carolina, who's kind of the big riser, big physical bowling ball of a running back, explosive in short areas. Those 3 for me is the tier. Like, those guys are the 3 top guys without question. Then after that is where you get your guys that are more role players. I don't think it's an exceptionally deep class. I think that the top is very good with those 3. But then I think we hit the middling group of Kenny Gainwell from Memphis. You might mention Michael Carter. We talked about Trey Sermon a little bit. Elijah Mitchell from Louisiana. Kylan Hill from Mississippi State. Like, they're all situationally good football players. I just don't think that there's anybody in that group that is going to be a high volume ball carrier. I think that a guy like a Kenny Gainwell could, when you combine the running and receiving threat that he has, could be a volume player in that regard, maybe similar to a Giovanni Bernard, who's been around in the league for a long time now. But I think that it's the top 3 of the class that are the traditional potential 3 down backs, and then some really interesting depth pieces. I think that it's got some depth to it, but I don't think it's an exceptionally great class when we're talking about, like, okay, here's some guys that could potentially be early down ball carriers at the top, which we have. Then where's the next guy? I think there's a little absent of those guys, high volume ball carriers, but I do think that they have some interesting role players in that mid to late rounds.
What makes Kyle Pitts so good?
He's 6'5 plus, 245 pounds, ran a 4.44, has the longest wingspan of a tight end recorded in the last 25 years. I mean, the kid's a freak, to be honest. Like, he's just I mean, who are you putting on him? Or why are you putting a linebacker on him? Is that what you're planning on doing? Because that's not going to work. Are you going to put a safety on him? That's not going to work. Are you going to put him outside against J.C. Horn, who J.C. Horn's a damn good football player, by the way? Kyle Pitts is still going to win. No matter who you put on him, he has a mismatch in some area, which is just ridiculous. Like, this kid could literally line up at tight end in line, at H-back, in the slot, at X. Like, he is an alignment versatile player, and he can win against any stylistic of a football player, which just makes him so outrageous. And then, honestly, people aren't going to want to hear this. Better blocker than people give him credit for. He's not terrible. He's not. He's thin framed, so he's never going to be like, George Kittle or anything. But the guy gets after it. He's a good, very good football player. He's a solid enough blocker. And no matter where you align him up, he is a mismatch waiting to happen.
Sounds like Shannon Sharp.
Man, I mean, obviously different paths there, right? Because Shannon came from Savannah State, smaller school. But, I mean, you're right. We want to put a corner on him? He's too big. You want to put a linebacker on him? He's too fast. It's the same thing. Obviously, he's a little longer than Shannon is, which makes him like, oh, my God, up top, throwing the ball up to him in the red zone, let's say. Like, who can jump with Kyle Pitts with that wingspan? It's just absurd. So, I see comparisons thrown out a lot to Darren Waller from the Las Vegas Raiders. I think stylistically it makes sense. Physically it makes sense. But, I mean, to be honest, like, we haven't seen a Kyle Pitts come out in several years now. He's the best tight end prospect to come out in quite a bit. He's an absolute physical freak.
Pat Fryermuth, Hunter Long, Brevin Jordan, all guys that have gotten a lot of attention, a lot of talk. I know early on when Ohio State played Penn State, not going to lie to you, bro, I was nervous because I said if Pat Fryermuth goes off and gets loose, this could be a long game. We did find out very, very quickly Penn State was not that team we expected them to be this past season. And Ohio State, with Baron Brown and Pete Werner, really did a good job guarding him. I think he only had a few catches in that game. I think he had a touchdown, but his production was not what I expected. The large breakout game that I thought he would have had at that time. I say breakout. He was already a star in college football, but I thought he would have had a huge game there. Other tight ends, who's good? Also, first time I'm going to ask you this question, who may pop up on day 2 or latter parts or beginning of day 3 as well with this group?
So, I mean, you mentioned the next wave after Kyle Pitts. It's been a little underappreciated from 2 to 4 just because they're in the class with Kyle Pitts and there's obviously a drop off. But for me, like Pat Fryermuth, if healthy, like late first, early second, I wouldn't discount it because, like you said, I mean, he's got the Baby Gronk nickname for a reason. The kid is a fantastic football player. He's got a chip on his shoulder because he went to Penn State and he wasn't even the top tight end recruit that they got that year, which is absurd. So he's got that mentality where he's underappreciated to a large degree, which, is a dangerous thing for a guy like that has that chip on his shoulder. So Pat Fryermuth is a good football player. You mentioned Hunter Long. I compare him to Hunter Henry, which, obviously same first name. I mean, I think that he is just a really solid football player, plays above the rim, has that size. I think there's just very solid to him. And if Brevin Jordan's that West Coast yak guy, like off of play action, you want to get him the ball in space and he becomes basically an ipso facto slot receiver. Like that's what he is. And he's a very talented football player. It's just for him, he's a little scheme dependent. Not every team is going to value a Brevin Jordan as much as some, but I think he's still a very talented football player. After that top 4, the class falls off a cliff, to be very honest. Like there is a big drop. Guys want Tommy Tremble to be the next guy, and he's a Notre Dame guy, so I've watched him a bunch. Very hesitant on Tommy Tremble. I'm very hesitant on him because I know he's a darn good blocker, like probably the best blocking tight end in this class.
That fits Notre Dame with how good they are at blocking both offensive and pass pro.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's weird too because Tommy went to Notre Dame as kind of that flex tight end recruit that also went to his pro day and ran in the 4.5. So you're like, wow, this kid's an athlete, right? But like his biggest impact was in line as an H-back, as a fullback blocking. Like that was easily his best part of him. And then in the pass game, not much production. I mean, he had like 19 receptions this year, not much. I mean, obviously he was working with Michael Mayer, their true freshman tight end, who's fantastic, who's going to be a first-round pick in a couple years. but not a lot of volume. And honestly, his ball skills scare me. A couple drops in a low amount of volume, and everything is just a double catch. Like, it just worries me because those windows are going to come even tighter soon. So I do have him as my 5th guy just because I think he brings a lot of value as a blocker. And I know there's some underutilized skills as an athlete, but the ball skills just scare me very much. I'm very hesitant on him. And then you have guys like Tony Poljan from Virginia, Quentin Morris from Bowling Green. Like, there's some guys that are worth mentioning, worth keeping an eye on. Trey McKitty, that was at Florida State, that transferred to Georgia, that was never used as a receiver, really highlighted. I mean, he had like 7 catches this year for Georgia. So it's a very big question mark after that top 4. There's a steep drop. There's some interesting prospects, but overall, the depth of this class is not great. But fortunately, you have a blue chipper at top, and then you have a very solid 2 through 4 in the class.
I only have time to ask you one question. And it's going to be about, as far as O-lineman, going to skip the interior O-line. Not that there's lack of importance, just we don't have the time for it. I'm going to go with the offensive tackle spot. Panay Sewell, Rashawn Slater, Christian Darrisaw. Could all 3 of these guys start day 1?
Yes, they can. Panay Sewell, I mean, hands down, man.
Yeah.
He is the most. You want to talk about Justin Fields being overly scrutinized, which he actually has been. Panay Sewell has been so overly scrutinized. I just don't understand it, man. The kid is 6'5", 330, dominated everybody that went in front of him as a 19-year-old man. Went to the pro day and tested very well for his size. The kid is just so good. He is going to be a starting left or right tackle early on in his career from day 1, whether it's the Miami Dolphins or Cincinnati Bengals or whoever decides to draft him. He is a starting level offensive tackle the minute he steps onto a field. And I think that he could be a Pro Bowler and All-Pro pretty early in his career. Christian Darrisaw, a little more raw, but a big rise from Virginia Tech. Athletically, he can stick right now. There's just something about his game right now where, like, it's just, you're in good position, you're framing well, finish. Why do you look lackadaisical sometimes? Like, there's just moments where it just looks like he has a brain fart, to be honest. But I think that he's going to get drafted by a team like the Los Angeles Chargers. He's going to be pressed into an early responsibility. I think he's going to do a good job because I think that he's a really good athlete. He has the length. He's just a good football player. And then Rashawn Slater, is he an offensive tackle? Is he a guard? I do a podcast with David Turner, Mavs Sports Take, where he was a scout for 18 years, that he thinks he's a center. Wow, so okay. There's expectations all across the board. I think the one team that I keep looking at, and I'm right outside of Philly, so I go on these Philly podcasts sometimes, right, in the radio spots, and they ask me about who the pick at 12 is. I keep saying it's a corner or wide receiver, but if Rashawn Slater's there, because, I mean, the Eagles have questions at left tackle. They have injuries at right tackle. They have injuries at right guard. Jason Kelsey could retire any day, like any year, I should say. So where does Rashawn Slater fit best? We'll see. He's a to-be-determined type of guy. I think a team might draft him to play offensive tackle, but I think I prefer him inside a guard. Either way, he's going to start very early in his career because he is going to be one of the best 5 on a football team, and he has the versatility to him where he can play multiple positions on the offensive line.
Defense, Ryan.
Yep.
Azeez Al-Ajeri. I hope I said that name correctly. I'm trying to get better with names, bro, with this pronunciation and podcasting. Am I good with that?
Azeez Ojulari.
Ojulari. Wow.
You almost got it.
Okay. But the edge position, my mind is not like yours. You say edge, I say defensive end. You guys evaluate different with wording and verbiage than I do. But with those two, Ojulari, Gregory Rousseau, who opted out, I'm still getting used to the opt-out stuff. I want you to play selfishly, kind of. Your coaches, your teammates want you to play. But you also have Kwity Paye, who I've actually watched recently, because I did a spot for another podcast, and they're asking about other Big Ten people. And I said, Kwity Paye could be a guy that either stand up 3-4, DN, or 2-point stance, 3-point stance, either one, 3-4, 4-3. I think he could fit either scheme. Where do you see those 3 guys going, and who could be kind of a sleeper in this edge group?
Yeah, I think so. Edge group, and it's a great point, Jay. As actually the first time I met David Turner, who I mentioned before, like I said the word edge, and he's like, "What the hell is an edge? Like, what does that mean?" Right? And it's like, 4-3 defensive end or 3-4 outside linebacker. Either way, you're talking about an outside track rusher. Like that's what an edge is, right? So for those guys specifically, Aziz is more of that 3-4 outside linebacker, but also I think he is pretty physical. So I think he can play in a 4-man front as well. So I think he's scheme versatile. And I think that he has some nice flexibility. He's that true outside track rusher who has a ton of speed and flexibility. Like that's who that is. And there's not a lot of those guys in this class, which makes him very coveted up top potentially, even though he's apparently dealing with some medical recheck issues. Greg Rousseau is a complete opposite. This kid is almost 6'7". This kid is now bulked up to right around 270 pounds, played at 245 pounds, had 15 and a half sacks for the University of Miami as only a redshirt freshman, opted out. He's a weird evaluation, going to be very honest. He's a guy that was moved up and down the line of scrimmage, took advantage of inside on guards a bunch with the length that he does have. Compares for me to a guy like Jason Pierre-Paul, which I don't think he's the most explosive edge of all time, but I think that he does have a ton of length, and I think he's a good functional athlete that can move all around. And I think as he continues to grow into his body, the more lethal he's going to be. Because I asked him, like, who's a player that you look up to? And he said, the guy that I'm out on my game after, and the reason I want to gain all this weight and I want to play up near 280, 290, or eventually, because his body can hold it, is Calais Campbell, former Miami Hurricane as well. So that's kind of what he is. He's that big end that has a ton of length. I think that he's being undervalued a ton. I think he's going to go in the first round, despite people being somewhat kind of cooling on him at this point. But I think he's super talented. And Kwity Paye, like you said, if you put Kwity Paye's Northwestern game from this year on, you'll come away and you'll say that kid's going in the top 10, because then he's on the Feldman's freak list. He ran the 4.5s at 270 pounds, like, freak show, right? But it's very up and down. It's not consistent. He's a guy that was another guy that was unfairly, was unfairly given a lack of opportunity this year with the Big Ten and, having a limited schedule. He was not given the opportunities that some people were afforded, to no fault of his own. So I think he's just a little raw, but I think he's physical. I think he plays with good effort. I think the skill set is there. There's just some, you have to smooth out the edges on a guy like Kwity Paye a bunch. I think he's more a 4-3 guy. I know some people are going to treat him as he could play a 3-4 stand up. We saw a video of him going out, just flipping his hips in pass coverage the other day, which looked nice. But I really think that he's a guy that you want to pin his ear back and let him go. And I think he has more than enough length to play in an even man front.
Pick any group, Ryan. I'll do this, and then one other question to wrap this up. Pick any other group and 3 players from that: linebacker, interior D line, corner, or safety. Have at it. What other group? Put these two together. What group surprises you with the top 3, and what group with their top 3 in that position kind of worries you?
So I will say my biggest surprise throughout this season, going back from summer. I left summer, and I put out an article in the summer that J.C. Horn was cornerback 1. I love J.C. Horn. I liked Patrick Surtain, the junior, obviously, a lot, coming out of the summer. But I didn't love the cornerback group. I didn't. I was hesitant on it. I was like, oh, man, I don't know about this group. I don't know. Now I'm the complete opposite. I think it is one of the strongest positions in this year's class. We're talking about guys, like I just mentioned. J.C. Horn's my guy. He, for me, whether you're lining up against a small slot like Elijah Moore, you're lining up against Kyle Pitts, you're playing against Seth Williams, whatever body type, he has experience playing inside and out. He is a super physical press man corner that can line up against any body type. And for me, that's where the NFL is going, because the NFL is now a matchup dictated league. So you need guys that can match up to multiple skill sets and body types. And I think that's what he is. That's why I value him slightly over Patrick Surtain. I think Pat Surtain is a fantastic football player who's going to go in the top 12 picks, maybe top 10 picks. So, I think very highly of him. He's just more that traditional outside corner, can play press man, can play cover 3, can play pretty much anything. And he's got the highest floor because, just from a technical perspective, he's very solid. You can tell that he's watched film and worked out with his father for his entire life, who was obviously a Pro Bowl cornerback for the Miami Dolphins and Kansas City Chiefs. So that makes total sense that he is so far ahead technically. And I think that he's a really good football player. My third corner is actually a little different than some. Some people have Greg Newsome. Some people have Caleb Farley, who's obviously dealing with the injury concerns. I have Eric Stokes from Georgia. I really, really, really like Eric Stokes. I I watched his tape in the summer and I was so surprised. I didn't think I was going to like him because, you kind of are just like combing through some things. No interceptions in 2 years as a starter. I'm like, what is this, man? Like, what? And then I watched his tape. I'm like, oh, there's a reason he's not getting there's a reason that people aren't throwing at him because he's so good. He's just staying glued to everybody. He's staying in phase. And then this year, they mix up a little more man to zone. So he gets 4 interceptions. He has a really nice season for Georgia. He's 6 foot plus. He ran in the 4.2s. He's an exceptional athlete.
You say
Ran
4.2s?
4.25 at his pro day.
Oh my gosh.
Which some people obviously are questioning the validity of pro day times, which is understandable. But then also he had a 41.5-inch vert. So that translates. He's a really good athlete. So yeah, I like Eric Stokes a ton. I think the quarterback group, I mentioned Greg Newsome, Caleb Farley, Ifeatu Melifonwu, Tyson Campbell. There's so many good corners this year. It's a really good class. And for 2 straight wide receiver groups the last 2 years of putting so much talent in the NFL, we need this. We need some corners to be able to match up. So great stuff. And then if I had to pick class, I mean, it's been highly publicized. Interior defensive line is bad. Like, it's just a bad class. I like Christian Barmore. I think he's going to go in the first round. He's got a lot of talent. I compare him to Marcel Darius. Obviously, I was a former Alabama player as well. I think he's a very good football player. I think he's got volume sack potential in the interior. But then after this class, man, I like Levi Onwuzurike from Washington. He's an opt-out kid who didn't really put it together in 2019. He's a great athlete, but is this tangible enough? You're just kind of throwing darts at the wall a little bit because you want to believe in his upside, you want to believe in his talents, but you haven't really seen it enough, And then there's a bunch of guys in that group like Elaine McNeil from NC State and blanking on his name, the defensive tackle from number 5, Bobby Brown from Texas A&M. There are some guys to be excited about, but it's just not a great class. Not a great class. Barmore, in most years, I feel like could be fighting for 2 or 3 on an interior defensive line list, but he's your ipso facto interior defensive lineman 1. And then the depth after that is some guys, but nobody that I'm really getting that excited about, to be honest.
Ryan, at the end of last year, at the end of our little pre-draft little episode we did, I asked you about Keaton Slovis. Are you still as high on Keaton Slovis as you were last year? I
am. I already started the 2022 evals. So the quarterback class is not going to be as talented up top. Okay. But I'm telling you right now, so I think it's a 3-horse race for me early on for the players that I've watched. I've watched about 6 or 7 quarterbacks to this point. The 3 best quarterbacks that I have seen so far that I think could make that ascension to being the top quarterback next year, potentially Spencer Rattler from Oklahoma. I think he's one. Very talented. Keaton Slovis for me is just advanced, and he was working through a shoulder injury, so 2020 was not quite as good as his freshman year was, but I expect a big rebound in a normal season because Pac-12 was obviously very affected by the COVID shutdown as well. And then Carson Strong from Nevada for me is a guy that I've been talking about for a while. I really like Carson Strong a bunch. He plays in that air raid system, which isn't incredibly translatable to the NFL, but the kid has a cannon for an arm, had a great season. But yes, to answer your question, just with name and dropping a couple other guys, I think Keaton Slovis is a very good opportunity to be the first quarterback off the board next year. I think that everything is there for him. I just want to see him put a healthy, full season on display this year because I think from a technical perspective, he's been working with Kurt Warner for a couple years now, to my knowledge. He's so sound fundamentally. He's always on platform. He's always balanced. I really do like Keaton Slovis a lot.
Last question. From what you've done with your evaluation so far for 2022, who is the best player you've evaluated so far?
Highest grade that I've given out so far. I'm almost adding up grades on Kayvon Thibodeau, so this might change. The defensive end from Oregon. Highest grade is Kyle Hamilton from Notre Dame, the safety. This kid.
That's a homer pick, bro.
That is not a homer pick. I'm telling you right now. I've given out 3 first-round grades so far in the summer. One was Kenyon Green, offensive lineman from Texas A&M, who's a fantastic football player. Played offensive guard. He's moving out to tackle. Apparently going to play left tackle. George Karlaftis, defensive end from Purdue, which you should be very familiar with. And then Kyle Hamilton. Kyle Hamilton, if his grade ended the way it is, he would have the highest safety grade that I've ever given out.
Oh, wow.
It is 6'4", 220. Such a good athlete that Notre Dame asked him to play single high a ton. I mean, and the kid just doesn't miss tackles. Like, he doesn't miss tackles. He has incredible athleticism, incredible range for a player his size. I think he's a fantastic football player. So you call me a homer if you want, but next year when Kyle Hamilton playing a devalued position at safety, doesn't usually go in the top 10. When he's going top 5 or top 10, just remember what Ryan said.
I will absolutely do that. Ryan, this has been fun, man. Let the good people know, once again, they can connect with you via social media, then also track you during the draft as well.
Yeah, so Rise and Draft is my handle on Twitter. Make sure to follow. I'll be on a couple different draft shows during. We'll be going live. Have some great. I'll be able to talk ball with some great. Actually, it's a Miami Dolphins podcast, the Fanatics, who have Richmond Webb, former Notre Dame, former Miami Dolphin great offensive lineman, will be on there. So we'll be able to talk ball on there first day, and then day 2 and day 3, I'll be on with David Turner and Mab Sports Take. Talking with guys like Blake Bedingfield, former scouts, former players, players that are going to be drafted. We'll hopefully have some live kind of, interviews right after they get drafted and everything. So a lot of fun things to see. If you want to track it, again, Rise and Draft on Twitter is where you can find all the NFL draft festivities.
Guys, I've been podcasting for almost 2 years now. It'll be 2 years on May 12th. And Ryan is still the only NFL draft scout I have had on any podcast I have done. Ryan, I was this close to hitting up Alex Gilstrap, your buddy you do a podcast with, but I stuck with you. You do a phenomenal job. Lock on Buckeyes here as well. And I'm sure people listening to this will enjoy the amount of information they've received in a short amount of time about this year's NFL draft prospects. Ryan, thank you once again for coming on the Jay Stevens podcast.
Oh, absolutely, Jay. I appreciate you as always, man. You're one of the good ones. Anytime you want to talk ball, I'm always there for it. And I appreciate you reaching out like always. And this is the fun time of the year for me. So I truly do appreciate every time that you have me on. It's always a fun time.